Welcome to the TCM Teach Podcast, the business podcast designed exclusively for acupuncturists and Chinese medicine herbalists who are ready to build thriving, sustainable businesses. I'm Sabey Smith, a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, professor, coach, entrepreneur, and I've spent years helping practitioners just like you not only master their clinical skills, but also navigate the complex world of compliance and business strategy. Today's episode is an important one. We're diving into how to sell herbal formulas legally, both online and in your clinic. And yes, there are going to be nuances to that. This is a huge area of opportunity for acupuncturists if you did herbs, obviously, and you're cleared to do so in your state. But it's also one where there's a big lack of clarity. And to be honest, there's a lot of lack of clarity still. So I'm going to try and break that down for you a little bit more. But with that said, what I don't want to happen to you is for you to get into legal trouble quickly, because that can happen if you don't know what you're doing. So we're going to break it down step by step with some of the basics, and you can confidently expand your practice and protect yourself at the same time. So please remember, I am simply a practitioner here to support you on your journey. The information shared in this podcast is intended for educational and learning purposes only. It should not be taken as professional, legal, or financial advice, as I am simply here just sharing information as part of the profession. So for specific guidance to your business, consult with the appropriate licensed professional, such as an accountant, a lawyer, whatever is applicable. So keep that in mind. So let's get started. Why compliance matters in herbal sales. It may seem obvious on the surface, but let's talk about it a little more. So I have some key points that I want to bring up here. So herbal medicine, as we know, is very powerful. It may have a bad rap in the US, and for a good reason, because there's a lot of people dishing out herbs who don't know what they're talking about, or supplements sticking in every herb that they heard was good and not understanding the nuances to the actions of how they actually work in the body. So the regulations around it are really important. And I should also say the lack thereof. The lack of regulations are important to know as well. Because while things are regulated, if you go through the process, you can create more protection for yourself. But here we are in a gray area because it falls under dietary supplements. But there are nuances if it's your clinic versus your supplement business. And we talked about that in previous episodes, but we're gonna break this down more. So patients trust you, not only recommending safe formulas, but also to ensure what they're purchasing is legal, high quality, and properly labeled. So we see things on different websites where maybe we've never heard of the name, but it's cheaper. Well, sometimes they actually have active ingredients that are not listed. Maybe they don't have to be. So this doesn't fall under the same category as prescription medications, which are heavily scrutinized by the FDA. Whatever you may feel about that is kind of irrelevant here, because the bottom line is they're heavily scrutinized in their research. They have studies to back them up. Yes, you have to read who created the study, blah, blah, blah. But herbs and supplements don't have that in the Western world as much, maybe due to funding, whatever it may be. But please understand that it's important that you provide good quality products to your patients, because it's going to be a reflection of you. So the herbal market is under increasing scrutiny. We do have the FDA, FTC, and state boards, but one mistake can result in fines, investigations, and loss of license. We have importance of CGMP, good practices, certified good manufacturing practices, that come into play. And there's a big difference here. Are you giving herbs just in your clinic, and is that legal under your license? Or are you trying to sell online to the general public? Two very different things. So think of compliance here as building a safe container. All right. So we want to protect the practice, protect your patients, protect the integrity of TCM. So this is something that opens up a whole can of worms for me, is when someone thinks that they know what they're talking about, or they never have had herb training or anything, and they just throw a bunch of herbs together. It's completely imbalanced. And you see this a lot with supplements with like yang tonics. Everyone's obsessed with yang tonics, and then they forget all about the yin aspects to them because they weren't trained. So then we run into issues, and that, if it's related back to TCM, that's how we lose access to herbs. For example, ma huang being ephedra. That has always been safely used in TCM until people started using it for weight loss, and then they overdid it, and then bad things happened. Now the FDA labels it as all bad, no one can use it. So it is a little different for us who are affected using it properly in medicine. So key takeaways I want you to get here are going to be: selling herbs legally is going to build long-term trust, and it's going to build sustainability for your business. And we're going to get into see what the landscape really looks like here. So what is this looking like? So we have federal level, state level, and licensing boards. So the FDA regulates labeling, structure and function claims, and manufacturing practices for supplements and herbs. The FTC regulates advertising and marketing language. So those are two important things. So while it falls under the category of dietary supplements, that's very important, but you still have to have proper labeling and disclosures of everything. What's in it? What are they taking? There is a certain percentage that may not have to be labeled if they're considered inactive ingredients, and sometimes herbs are considered inactive ingredients, believe it or not, where you can actually read that on a label and look at active versus inactive ingredients, and then being a practitioner, you're like, oh, a bunch of these are actually active, but because of the lack of research or something, they don't have to be labeled as active. So keep that in mind when you're reading labels. And this is really going back to products in general, any internal, external product. You really want to disclose what's going in there just for your own safety. Don't worry about someone stealing your formula or something. You can always patent that, and maybe that's something we can dive into as well, because patenting is a long process that can protect you if you have something that's cutting edge. Obviously, TCM, however, is rooted in a lot of tradition, and a lot of companies are creating spin-offs of traditional formulas anyway, so patenting kind of isn't always necessary, but it can happen. So just understand that at the state level, scope of practice laws vary. So some states allow acupuncturists to prescribe and dispense herbs, while others might restrict it, or you have to have a certain exam versus not. So you have to check on the state level if you can give herbs in your clinic. Now, here's a distinction I want to give you here is there's a difference between giving herbs in your clinic versus being a herb company. Okay, so you can be an herb company and just act as a supplement company completely independent from your practice. That's going to differ with obviously state and licensing, regulations and everything. However, there's two hats that we have to differentiate here. Are you giving herbs in your clinic, or are you acting like we'll call it a supplement company, a product company, so herb product company, where technically people can generally buy those in a store, right? Think of all the herb companies that you could see going into a store. I mean, I've seen Plum Flower very easily, or was it Dr. Shen, or there's a few products out there. One I could think of off the top of my head is like Cold Snap. That's all TCM based. That was a funny story with Cold Snap. I remember I walked into a natural grocer one time and I was like, oh, Cold Snap. Yeah. So that's all based in Chinese medicine, right? And they're like, I said, what's in it? They said, oh, it's just a bunch of Chinese herbs to help you get over a cold. And I was like, yeah, which ones? I'm a practitioner. And they were like, oh, yeah, cool. Well, here's the bottle. It was like I kind of ended up knowing more about the product than they did, which was cool for me, but also a little concerning. Like, people are dishing out these herbs, right, as a supplement. But the rep knows less than, everyday me who happens to have the education. The reps really need to know about this stuff. And you see this in the drug world too all the time, the prescription world, where it's like pharmaceutical sales reps. It's like we have herbal supplement sales reps. It all happens. So there's company, and then there's like you as the practitioner. And you can absolutely separate these entities. If you want to patent some formulas, if you don't want to just give out raw formulas or prep things specific for a patient, you can consider being your own company separate from your business. So that way you just follow all the regulations of what a supplement company would do. Certified good manufacturing practices, making sure all labeling is good, packaging, all that. So it's a long process, but you can absolutely do that if you want to prep things, if you want to sell them online, sell them out of state, whatever it may be. That might be something. Again, this is just me sharing what I know, is you will probably want to separate from your actual practice. So that way the liability is spread. So that way if something happens in your practice, it won't make your company, your herb company suffer, or your supplement company suffer, where if something happens in your herb supplement company, you don't want it to reflect poorly on your practice. So remember those two, you can absolutely separate those two. I'm trying to simplify as much as I can in this podcast. So just also remember licensing boards. Each board has its own stance on what is allowed for in-clinic dispensing and online sales. I need my tea over here. So for example, if you're living in California and you only took NCCAOM and you did not take California licensing exam, guess what? You are going to not be able to give out those herbs as a practitioner because you can't even practice without a license in California. Now, that's not to say, now you'll have to check with a lawyer on this, but that's not to say you can't start a supplement company in California. So you just can't be directly giving it to patients as a practitioner. So these are some nuances that you'd want to talk to a lawyer about, especially in the state that you're working in. That is going to be really important to think about as you go further into your road of herbs. And I remember I've actually coached some supplement company owners in the past, and their company, while they were living in a certain state, was functioning in a different state. And there's a lot of nuances to that we'll probably talk about too with business. However, the business partners were living in separate states, and I just remember coaching them through this, and they had a wildly successful company. And it was actually kind of funny. It was a supplement company, and they were like, well, what do I do now? I kind of have everything I need and want. So I was actually coaching them on helping them through working with their partner because they had a little separation with. Anyway, I'm not gonna disclose who, because that would go against my coaching, obviously. So try to keep that private. But with that said, my point is, if you can't do something in one state, you might be able to do it in a different state. And, there's a lot of nuances there. Talk to your lawyer, or find a good lawyer. We'll talk about that more in the future. Long story short, just because you don't have a license, I'm going to be careful how I say this. Just because you don't have a license does not mean you can't work with supplements, dietary supplements, which herbs technically fall under the same category. What you can't be doing is dispensing them as a practitioner. But if you create a supplement company, that might be a different story for you. There's just different things you have to go through. But that might be a little too detailed. So let me keep going. So what else do I have here? Selling herbs in the clinic. So you have direct dispensing. It's allowed in most states when it's tied to a patient-practitioner relationship. So I was already talking about this. I just have my notes here that I want to make sure I hit today. So most document the formula name, the dosage, and the patient instructions. How are they instructed to take it? You could do custom formulas. So there is more compliance responsibility. So labeling, ingredient tracking, and patient education. That's going to go on your EHR, your paperwork. So that's no surprise. You have a lot of practice with that. Pre-packaged formulas, however, have to come from compliant suppliers. So you want to avoid making disease claims when labeling or describing the product. So, okay, pre-packaged versus I made this for a patient because of their condition. Raw herbs are super easy for that. Tinctures can become a gray area, but if you make the tincture specific for a patient, or you make a tea pill specific for a patient, that could be different in a sense, but then you start slowly falling into manufacturing, where then you're required to have certified good manufacturing practices. It depends how big your operation is. Ironically, the more powerful being raw herbs, you're in a way going to be safer if you're just directly dispensing. You could directly dispense granules, obviously, raw herbs. I understand compliance. You can have a compounding herb pharmacy do it for you. However, if you prepackage something, you want to make sure, ideally, it's going to come from a FDA compliant supplier. So basically, certified good manufacturing practices factory or something of the sort. And you just don't want to make disease claims. Where I said in a previous episode, the example was cures asthma. You can't say that, but you can say improves lung function. Created to help support respiratory function, basically, something along those lines. It can't say cures this. You can't even say that in your practice, technically, anyway, so you should know that. But if you need the reminder, there you go. So selling herbs online. All right, this is where it gets different. You can do patient portal dispensing. So platforms like I was talking about, Crane, FullScript, ConHerb, Kimwell is another really good one. They're in New York. Make compliance easier. So you can prescribe it, they fulfill it, and your liability is thus reduced because it's their job to follow the good practices. So you'll be able to track it back. And honestly, running a small clinic or something of that sort, I've used these compounding dispensaries in the past, and they are wonderful. They make my life so much easier, and I don't have to stock anything. The downside is if I don't have something in stock, then I can't get it to the patient right away. So say you have, a patient who needs yin chow or whatever. If you don't have yin chow right then and there, well then, if we have to wait a week, what's the point of the yin chow anymore? Because now the wind heat could become a lung heat or whatever. Yin chow is not what we're going to use anymore. So that is the difference between I wish I had a product on hand versus using a dispensing pharmacy. If it's a chronic condition, I like the dispensing pharmacies if I'm not carrying stock of something. Because, hey, we're going to be doing this long term. Keep reevaluating with the patient. If we need to do a refill, we do a refill. And a little tip as a practitioner, you could do a slight markup, do whatever you want, because you have to include your time and your education in there as part of the price. So definitely keep those in mind, especially if you're first starting out. You don't have to stock everything. Maybe just have a couple things in stock. For example, like I was saying, you get someone who comes in with a wind heat, have yin chow on hand. Having yin chow on hand is super easy. Guizhou tong, maybe, real basics. So that is what I want to mention for patient portal dispensing. You can do that. It's good to have some things on hand, but if you're like really bare bones, bootstrapping it, you don't have a lot to invest in your practice right away. That's totally fine. These services exist for that reason. So that way you don't have to do that. And I love using them when I don't have something stocked. It's wonderful. E-commerce storefronts. This is going to require greater compliance. Labeling, disclaimers, FDA, FTC language like we talked about, and you are considered the responsible party for anything you sell directly. So, for example, if I wanted Crane Herb Company to fulfill something for me, they're sharing that responsibility with me. If I misdiagnose them, that's different. But if they're sharing that responsibility and we find out that the patient got sick from an herb due to something was wrong with the herb, I don't know, some mold or whatever, that doesn't fall on me. That falls on Crane Herb Company. And by the way, I'm not speaking negatively of Crane Herb Company. I'm sorry, Crane Herb Company, that you're the example here. You're just the first one I had on my list. Crane Herb Company is wonderful. Don't think that I'm speaking negatively of them. The point is, a company, if they mess up, they're going to get more of the flack for that versus me. If I messed up or I give you my product and messed up, I'm responsible. So that's the difference in what you're paying for. Is, are you creating your own products? So you have to label them. They have to be manufactured properly. and you are considered the responsible party if something were to go haywire. So just be careful there. That is one of the examples where I was suggesting, well, you can separate into two companies. Now, if you're first starting out, I understand. And if it's specific for a patient or you're a really small operation, you just have to weigh the risks. Okay. You want to be compliant for the more people you reach. If it's for like a couple people and you make something, then use your judgment, talk to your lawyer about that. Shipping herbs, you must follow USPS, UPS, and FedEx rules. That should be straightforward. International shipping is more restrictions, customs, and import laws. You're really getting into the idea of another company if you're thinking of shipping international anyway. Just be careful. How far do you really want this thing to go? Do you want to dispense herbs in your personal pharmacy, or are you trying to reach the masses? Because at that point, if I were you, again, my opinion, if I were you and I wanted to dispense herbs outside of my practice, I would start a separate company. And the reason I would start a separate company is because, one, it's not going to be tied to my license. It's going to keep all the liability within that company. I have to buy separate insurances and everything. But if something goes wrong, if that company has to dissolve, I can still be protected and keep my practice running, generally speaking. But you have to check state laws. If you're just dispensing from your clinic, the liability is on you, but it's practitioner to patient, one-to-one type deal. In order to go hybrid, you have a small amount of product made for your clinic. You just have to weigh the costs on that one because that may not even be worth it. So you really have to think about that. Just figure out what's going to work best for you. And then next, common legal pitfalls in herb sales. I got my nettle spearmint tea. It's just tasting real good today. All right, common legal pitfalls in herb sales. Speaking of herbs, right here. So using disease claims treats arthritis versus supports healthy joints. I've mentioned that a few times. Selling herbs in states where your license doesn't permit dispensing. Not a good idea. Not keeping records of herbal prescriptions and patient charts. Oh, please keep records. Otherwise, it's like it didn't happen. And then your malpractice insurance would not like that very much. And make sure your malpractice insurance covers that. Not keeping records of herbal prescription-based charts is not a good idea. Repackaging herbs with proper FDA-compliant labeling. So if you have things that you're giving out, and I'm not saying they're quote-unquote FDA approved, you need FDA-compliant labeling. You have to disclose what's in there and what it does with proper FTC, FDA language. Selling online without disclaimers, terms of service, and privacy policies, yeah, just don't do that. That would be a bad idea. So practical steps to protect your herbal business. Remember, it could be two. It could be a practice or it could be a business entity of its own. Verify your scope of practice with your state board. Number one, that should be obvious. Can you dispense herbs with the license you have? Work only with FDA-registered, GMP-certified herbal suppliers. Certified good manufacturing practices is your protection in that area. So make sure you utilize those properly. You also want to have, in my opinion, you would want to have really good, clean records of testing, heavy metals. Chinese herbs in particular get a bad rap for heavy metals or sulfites or whatever. So just keep that in mind. And you want, if someone is creating a product for you, you need to be compliant. So make sure you have that, the FDA language, make sure you have certified good manufacturing practices factory if they're making something for you. Set up clear disclaimers on your website and product labels. That's going to protect you. That is something a lawyer can help you with. And create a separate business entity like an LLC or corporation if expanding herbal sales significantly. Again, this is what I was trying to mention before. How big is your operation? Are you just trying to help the local community? maybe the liability can lie on you a little more, but you still should be following certified good manufacturing practices regardless. Or are you trying to sell across the country, across the world? That opens up your liability so much, I would not connect that to my clinic if I were you. I would start a different LLC. So use platforms like Fullscript or Crane, again, Kimwell, to reduce compliance burden and document everything in your clinic, prescriptions, consent, and patient education. And also document everything, all the herb sourcing and everything, if you're putting out a product, if you're an LLC putting out a product. So you see how I could speak of these two business types separately, but I'm trying to just give you an idea of here's what it looks like in your clinic. Here's what it could look like even outside of your clinic, how these could be different. Just document. You want to be able to trace back. If there's a recall, what are you going to do about it? That's why you should keep good labels of the raw herbs you keep in your practice as well. Make sure you have the batch numbers. TCM Herbal perspective on herbal sales. So in TCM, formulas are precise and personalized, but business law requires structure. So just as qi must flow freely within safe channels, your herbal business must flow within legal boundaries. I don't know, safe channels. I think you get what I'm saying. We just want this to be legal, and we want the qi to go where we want it to go properly and not diverge in the wrong place. So compliance is not a limitation. Yes, it can be annoying, but it's the container that allows herbal wisdom to reach more patients safely. Because guess what? Look at all the people who can dispense herbs who don't have any training. All these people who could create supplements who don't have any training. That's a little scary, right? So what we can do is we can actually change that. We could be a part of that positive change for people to understand herbalism a little further. I've gotten into arguments with people over how herbs are so effective and how I actually really need to understand pharmacology and herbology to make qualified decisions. And when people don't understand TCM, they're like, that's a load of BS. So, okay, that's fine. So I will help who I can help. However, I have literally gotten into some interesting discussions with some people about herbs. I am very passionate about herbs, and I think everyone should have the ability to have safe access to them as a result. And that's something we can change as practitioners. So I want to leave you with this. Selling herbs is one of the most impactful ways to expand your practice and serve patients or create a different revenue stream, but only if it's done legally and responsibly. With the right systems, you can grow your herbal business without fear or legal repercussions. So I've created a resource called the Herb Formula Sales and Compliance Guide. It's a guide that walks you through the critical areas of herbal sales compliance, from in the clinic dispensing to online sales. So you'll find that in the membership. And in our next episode, we're going to be diving into understanding acupuncture malpractice insurance a little further. So until then, thanks for tuning in to the TCM Teach Podcast, and we'll see you next time. See ya.